Okay. Okay. So good evening and welcome to the 2021 edition of Great Decisions. We're sorry that we can't all be together in person in the library's community room. I hope next year we can be, but we're happy to be able to use Zoom to bring us together for these critical discussions. Before we get started, I want to remind you that after the formal presentation, everyone will have an opportunity to discuss the topic of WHO and the COVID-19 pandemic. I have a few reminders. The World Affairs Council is a nonpartisan organization. If you're not a member yet, please consider becoming one. And let's treat each other with respect. If you want to say something, please stay on the topic of tonight's program. And now it's a pleasure to introduce tonight's facilitator, Nevin Hollinger. Nevin is a board member of the World Affairs Council, which he has served as president and vice president. Before he retired, he was the president and CEO of the Pennsylvania Easter Seal Society. His working career also included the position of director of the West Reading Main Street program, program director of BCIU, and director of the Reading Model Cities program. He's a native of Berks County and he's received his degree from Moravian College. And now I will turn it over to Nevin. Thank you, Nevin. Thank you.
And thank you so much. And thanks for the comments about the World Affairs Council. I really appreciate that. For those of you who may not know, World Affairs really has been providing the Great Decisions programs for quite some time. And we really appreciate the relationship which we build up with Anne and more specifically the YMCA Public Library, who has been a host for, I don't know how many years. It's been a number of years since we've been working together on structuring this and working this program, and we truly do appreciate it. And I welcome everybody who is joining with us tonight. Again, my apologies for my image. I'm looking at myself and I'm in the dark and I have lights on behind me and I have a light over my head, and for some reason the image is not that great. So let me apologize up front for it.
But your face is shining through.
The topic, as Anne mentioned, is COVID-19. And COVID-19 is something which is impacting our lives on a daily basis. It's been here for more than a year. It's worldwide. And as I said, it touches us daily, both directly and indirectly. There are massive numbers of people who have been infected nationally right now. And I heard this today, it's in excess of 425,000 people have died. And putting it into some kind of a ratio context, that's 1 in 13 people. That's a pretty high number. Our healthcare treatment in the United States and worldwide, as you also have been hearing, are really overwhelmed. We've had lockdowns in cities, in communities, in states, and now in the last 3 or 4 weeks, they've begun to identify variants which have begun to show up as components of the COVID-19 virus. And there's some concern, although a vaccine has been developed and is being utilized, there's now some concern as to whether that vaccine is also going to be have a positive effect on the variances which have come out of COVID-19 itself. So we're told to wear masks, avoid crowds, get vaccinated, and bottom line is, where do we go from here? What's going to happen? And more specifically, in regards to tonight's discussion, how does the World Health Organization tie into COVID-19? That also is somewhat of a controversial topic. How do we handle COVID-19 globally? what are the issues facing the World Health Organization in attempting to plan, coordinate, treat, and curtail the spread of the pandemic? And how do the countries globally that are not only part of the World Health Organization, but who are obviously affected by the COVID-19 virus, what role do we collectively have to play in this issue? Hopefully everybody has had the opportunity to look and read the article in the Great Decisions booklet pertaining to the subject. Normally, we have a video that accompanies the topic. Unfortunately, I don't know if it's because of we're doing this topic a little bit earlier than had been initially projected, but the accompanying video has not been made available. Although I would like to mention that there are a number of videos pertaining to the World Health Organization on YouTube, and specifically the World Health Organization in relationship to COVID-19. As a matter of fact, I've had the opportunity to look at 2 or 3 of them, and they are very, very good. So let me, I'd like to proceed tonight in somewhat of the following manner. Let me share with you a few of the facts which I've taken from the book, the article in the Great Decisions booklet, some of the material which I have retrieved from 2 of the videos which I looked at. And then I'm going to kind of open the floor for comments from your part. And hopefully we can wrap up with some questions which may more specifically focus on the issue of COVID-19, the issue of how it impacts our lives, our country, and what are some steps, if any, which can be taken by the World Health Organization in dealing with the overall issue.
Do you mind if I interrupt?
Sure.
I'm sorry. My name is Brittany. I just was wondering what kind of videos you were referencing as far as what you've seen, you know.
If you go to YouTube and use the search World Health Organization COVID-19.
Oh, you mean in general? It wasn't anything referenced in the article?
No, no, it was not referenced in the article.
Oh, okay.
I'm just, I use these as reference for myself and kind of looking at the bigger picture, and I found them to be extremely helpful. So I'm just using those as, if it's something that you would like to take a look at, they are good.
Okay.
And
and can you post that so I can, I mean, because I haven't looked at this too closely. Can you post those links or?
I'm looking to Ann, but
Yeah, I can. Nevin, if you send me those links, if you send me the titles of the videos, when I send out the information about whether or not
I can
where this is going to be on YouTube,
I can do
I'll
that.
send them to you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Sure. So let's start with the basics. What is the World Health Organization? It's a specialized agency which was formed in 1948 and was responsible for global public health. Actually, it evolved from the United Nations. There are presently 194 countries who are members, and the United States, as of, well, up until last July, had been one of the major member state organizations. The Trump administration made a decision at that time that they were going to withdraw from the World Health Organization. But as of within the last few days, I have heard, and in viewing some of the comments from the incoming Biden administration, apparently the United States is once again going to become actively involved within the World Health Organization itself. I'm going to turn to the article which was in the Great Decisions magazine and share with you 2 paragraphs which I felt does a pretty nice job of outlining the role of the World Health Organization. The Constitution set out a vast mandate promoting the attainment by all peoples of the highest possible level of health that essentially covers all health issues everywhere in the world. The Constitution goes on to lay out 22 specific functions for the agency, ranging from very general proposing conventions, agreements, regulations with respect to international health matters, to very specific items such as standardizing diagnostic procedures. Initially, the agency's focus was very much on infectious disease, but over time, as the global burden of disease has shifted, our awareness of the need to address various health changes has evolved, and the member states' priorities have varied. The organization focuses on continually expanding to include things like non-communicable diseases, road traffic accidents, addiction, mental health, universal health care, and the strengthening of our global health systems. As I said, presently there are 194 member states who are participants. So here, the World Health Organization has a major goal of providing planning, direction, and action in dealing with global health issues. But being an organization with that broad a goal in mind has some significant limitations. One of them is in the structure itself. With 194 countries or member states involved, you obviously have a differentiation between larger countries versus smaller countries. And often this in itself, from a discussion and a focus standpoint, provides some significant issues which challenge the true purpose and goal of the organization itself. Secondly, the World Health Organization has some limited financial capabilities. Frequently, and this is something which was brought out in the article itself, there are member states who do not pay their dues on time. And to some degree, to a large degree, the World Health Organization is pretty dependent upon receiving those payments. As a result, the organization itself has over the years begun to rely more heavily on voluntary contributions. Another major point, the World Health Organization has no enforcement authority to mandate governments to abide by agreements or recommendations which come out of the organization itself. Although the recommendations are made, the bottom line, it has no teeth to enforce compliance or require compliance. Let me share a few of the positive aspects of the organization. It has been represented globally, and historically, it has addressed major public health issues. It was instrumental in dealing with the SARS problem, and as we all know, it has been instrumental in dealing with COVID-19. It provides regular press releases, briefings on COVID-19 and other issues, which are probably primarily or one of the primary focal points of its operation today. The recommendations are based on strong scientific study and fact, not necessarily on panic and fear. The World Health Organization has intervention capability. Conversely, member states may not always support the intervention. Let me utilize an example. specifically as it deals with COVID-19. When the World Health Organization representatives were dispatched to China, and as you know, COVID-19 initially was traced to China, they were restricted access to gaining object detailed information on the scope of COVID-19 itself. And as a result, the organization took a position that China misled the public. Now, again, can be somewhat of a controversial position to take, but it demonstrates the impact of potential conflict of member organizations not always being supportive of the dictates or the directives of the World Health Organization. Some of the major problems which they are faced with: obviously chronic underfunding. They lack the political in-depth evidence because they may stay focused on being result-oriented as opposed to objective responses. There's a quote in the article, in the article appearing in the Great Decisions magazine, which indicates that the World Health Organization lacks sticks, but it also lacks carrots. Members are making recommendations are mainly scientists, and it's very difficult to bridge the scientific gap with the political and the economic impact of having member states as active participants. A more diverse expertise is probably required. Some people blame the organization's shortcomings as being ineffective because the agency is not doing things which, in essence, they are directed to do. Let me share a few comments. Now, that's not what I'm moving ahead here because I have too many thoughts, too many notes in front of me. The organization is empowered not to do the fundamental delivery of World Health performance during the COVID-19, and across the board is this: member states get what they pay for and they get what they order, but they do not magically get what they need. Governments demand deference from the World Health Organization, but for decades have not provided adequate funding and direct support in order to achieve that task. Let me share a few of the comments which I heard and viewed as part of the videos which I referenced earlier. There is a strong need for the public to follow defined World Health Organization protocols globally. The countries must have plans and tools in place based on science to overcome COVID-19. We must collectively follow protocols. And let's just put this in the perspective of the United States. Obviously, this is a hot issue. Some states have plans in place. The federal government thus far has taken a position that they will handle the vaccine production, but beyond that, the distribution is in the hands of the states. Now, I think based on a change in the administration, there probably are going to be some, well, not probably, there are already in place some new means of dealing with this issue, but this in itself has caused some significant variance just within the United States. Puts this in the perspective of the world, and you can see what kind of conflicts are forthcoming. There must be a universal understanding that COVID-19 was started by us and must end through us. Again, put this in the perspective of being a global issue. Each of us has a responsibility to support this approach. Each of us, and when I say us, I'm not necessarily referring to us individually, I'm referring to us collectively with the member organizations and member states' participation. Vaccines provide a realistic solution, but it's required that production and supply capability of vaccines be consistent. The ability to share vaccines worldwide in the eyes of the World Health Organization is a necessity. Countries who receive vaccine must be able to distribute vaccines immediately. And looking at it from the perspective of the United States, this, as you have observed just within the past few days, is a significant issue. The amount of vaccine distribution, as was probably initially envisioned, now appears to be somewhat less than that which was initially defined. And that in itself has caused some problems. We are not looking for, the World Health Organization is not necessarily looking for people to blame, but they are focusing on the science of resolution. In other words, a scientific-based organization has to deal with the worldwide global politics and economics in the implementation of health-related resolution. There's another issue that there were some comments made about the availability of the vaccine and it being administered to wealthy countries only. And by so doing, the comment was directed to the economic impact that would have. It was noted, and this was by the president of the World Health Organization, that if there is not a reflective distribution to both wealthy and those poorer countries throughout the world, the economic loss and impact of that could exceed $9 trillion. Because if there is not equality in the distribution, it has a significant impact on the economic growth of all countries. And it was projected that the brunt of that loss would probably would in all likelihood be absorbed by some of the major supporters within the World Health Organization. This study was done by the International Chamber of Commerce. Let me share with you an article which appeared in appeared through the Associated Press that kind of brings home this topic. And it talked about the distribution of vaccine among wealthier organizations where 39 million doses have been administered in nearly 50 of the richer nations to date. But just 25 doses have been given to the lowest income countries. Not 25 million, not 25,000, just 25. It goes on to say that the world is in the brink of a catastrophic moral failure if this issue is not effectively dealt with within the next year. we must learn through the pandemic that it's not a black or white issue. We must listen, we must engage, we must communicate. Knowledge is not static. The politicalization of the science worldwide has become very difficult and challenging, as I've now cited a number of times, to make an implementation and a resolution of COVID-19 become reality. And this is probably one of the most significant issues which impacts the effectiveness of the World Health Organizations. Countries cannot look at the pandemic from only their perspective, but again must view it from a global setting. Let me go to one of the closing comments in the article, which I think nicely outlines the significant challenge, which is before all of the respective member states and countries. It's easy and convenient for governments to depict the World Health Organization as a dysfunctional bureaucracy trying to execute a political two-step on the head of a pin. But as the New York Times editorial board writes, instead, governments should try seeing the World Health Organization for what it is, a reflection of the countries that created it and wrote its bylaws. If they don't like what they see, they should work to improve that reflection. Our global collectiveness is our saving grace, and these injustices must be addressed and effectively dealt with. And that's truly the charge of the World Health Organization. Let me open the floor for the moment, and I'd like to receive some of your thoughts and comments, but kind of put them in this perspective. The organization, World Health Organization, is charged with a huge task. By virtue of its structure, as I defined, large countries and small countries attempting to coordinate meaningful and workable solutions. Is it really possible? It's an organization which, as I mentioned a number of times also, is extremely underfunded. And it's not something which has just surfaced within the last few years. This has been an issue over its years of existence. And how is the scientific resolution, which the organization is heavily focused upon, linked with the political and the economic organizational structure? I'm going to stop there and kind of open the floor for your thoughts and comments.
I muted everybody, so if you want to say something, please unmute yourself.
Hi, it's Dave Sachs. It seems to me that the World Health Organization is an organized way of having larger, more wealthy countries help to provide expertise to countries that are not so well resourced. And therefore, if the World Health Organization ceased to exist, it would not affect health in the United States. It would affect our ability to contribute to health in third world countries. Is that a fair statement to make?
David, I think it's a fair statement to make, taking into consideration the comment which I made pertaining to the relationship between the wealthier member states and the poorer member states. and more specifically, the economic impact it may have by virtue of the fact that it could result in, and I think the number was a $9 trillion deficit, world economic deficit worldwide, because of the inequity which is created. And it's a deficit which, as a result of the study anyway, would seem to fall on some of the larger member states, such as the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom. Those are the countries that are putting the major dollars into it. And I might include China in there, although, as has been a discussion point, especially in the last 6 or 7 months, I believe the United States probably has put more money into the World Health Organization than most, if not all, other countries has.
So if third world countries, let's say, can't get vaccines for a year, there's inequity there. But how does that translate into a huge hit to our economy? We're dealing with a relatively zero-sum game. There aren't enough vaccines to go around. So if the US makes more vaccines that would have gone to Americans available to third world countries, there will be fewer Americans vaccinated promptly than otherwise would be. So by being a wealthy country, we're shifting illness and we're shifting death to third world countries as opposed to having it here. So if we make those scarce resources available to third world countries, we're then choosing to absorb that morbidity and mortality here instead. So how does that morbidity and mortality in third world countries translate into a $9 trillion hit for developed nations? And what would the hit be if those scarce resources were indeed transferred to the third world countries, but then not available in the first world countries?
My interpretation, and I'm not, this is not end all be all fact, is in the economics of the situation where those smaller, poor countries would not be buying product that is generated in the larger countries, thus creating a significant deficit in trade throughout the world. And that significant deficit, because of the number of poor countries, would be significant. That's my interpretation, as opposed to looking at it from a scientific standpoint, which is strictly protecting through vaccine and through the distribution of vaccine, the health of populations within those respective countries.
I just think that the economic argument is a hard sell. You could look at it another way. If you have someone in America who gets sick with COVID, we spend a huge amount of money providing medical care. Whereas if someone in a third world country gets sick with COVID, the resources are far less, so far less money is going to be spent on them. So if you want to save money globally and have more money left over for people to buy goods and services, save the Americans, because we would otherwise spend so much money taking care of them.
Understand. Does anybody else have any thoughts about this issue?
No, I want to quickly, divert from where we were, but I just wanted to reference WHO's response to the COVID-19, effort, and especially given that US backed out, under the Trump administration, that is, but that they were able to secure funding privately, for the first time in March. I found that very interesting, that they were
First time in-
able to
you
secure
said first
private
time?
funding
First time in what did you say? I missed that.
since March of last year. Right. I didn't know that funding was so destabilized for WHO, and that I found it very interesting that, you know, in March when they launched the COVID-19 Solidarity Response Fund, they were able to raise over 233 million
Yes.
from more than 566,000 individuals. I found that very interesting.
Yeah. Apparently, and again, this is something that I don't know if this appeared in the article or not. I know that the Gates Foundation, as an example, Bill Gates' foundation has been very, very supportive over the years of the World Health Organization. And I'm
Right,
guessing
right.
that a significant amount of the voluntary dollars may be contributed through, well, the Gates Foundation being one, but as you mentioned, there were considerable other large donations forthcoming. I think it's noted in that article that, and I don't know if it's recently or over the history of the organization, that 80% of the contributions that came into, or 80% of the dollars funding the World Health Organization were contributed dollars.
I couldn't believe that either. Yeah.
That kind of, that's hard to grasp.
I know. And I also think I linked the connection between Lady Gaga and her hosting the inaugural. She was the one that actually hosted, you know, a fundraiser for that cause for WHO. I didn't know that.
Yes. Yeah. But let's put that in again in the perspective of this is an organization which was founded in 1947 and has been in existence since that time. It was set up, obviously, with a global perspective. I'm assuming it was set up, well, I'm not assuming, I believe it was set up with the intent that the member organizations would provide adequate financial support to meet its mission. And it appears as though, as we are saying, that has not happened.
Yeah. So how does WHO actually have a bite? How do they get their teeth?
Well, I think that's
kind of what I'm struggling with.
That's the questions which we're posing.
Yeah, I kind of think honestly, and I'm, pardon my interference. Like I said, I just read this, you know, I just joined, but honestly, I think as far as most wealthy countries go, they will only respond with bottom lines, right? So if we're talking profit, if we're talking anything that interferes with profit, they will listen. So when it came up with SARS, you know, with China, you know, when that first happened, right? Even COVID-19, they were stringing us along, the WHO stringing them along, right? What if we, meaning as a country, were put more force politically, obviously, put more force on the other country and say, listen, you don't comply with this, then we'll, you know, do X, Y, and Z, you know, tariffs or anything trade, anything dealing with their bottom line. Because we're globalized now. Countries, I mean, we're all globalized. We are a community. I mean, we have business operating all over the place. So what if, I mean, that's a way for WHO to have some teeth and just, you know, recommending maybe some action that a country takes if they don't, you know, comply, or if they're not, why can't, or is, you're saying that is strictly tied to political of the moment, you know?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the organization as was initially established and as it has been functioning, has a very strong scientific base to it. But organizationally, the decision-making structure, as I understand it, is very political. There
It
are
is.
member states consisting of wealthier countries, and I'm going to include the United States in there, and
Hmm.
China, and United Kingdom and Canada and so forth, as compared to some of the third world countries, many of the third world countries that exist. The membership right now, what did I say? It's
197.
142, 194 countries are members of the World Health Organization. But what does that mean in terms of the size? It's a huge representative organization, but it appears as though the power falls or has fallen in the larger, wealthier organizations themselves, which would tend to slant some of the decision-making necessarily away from the scientific base and move it more into a political economic base. Chris, I see your hand up there.
Yeah, I'd like to hear more conversation from other folks too. But my feeling right now is we here in the United States have lived through a year in our United States. And I think we're kind of a microcosm of the bigger global situation of which WHO and other nations are part of. In our own microcosm of the United States, my experience was there was political and scientific stuff going on. And for the Trump administration, there was the political stick that the science people, Dr. Fauci, had to restrain some of what he had to say. All right, so that same kind of thing is going on the bigger picture between the WHO and what happened with China, okay? Because they didn't want to speak up about what was going on initially.
Mhm.
And also because this was all new to everybody, to China too. This is a disease we don't even really know about fully. And yet here in the United States, we restrict our scientific voice that could have put out stuff scientifically that would have helped us greater as a nation to control it. And WHO is having that same problem on the global scale. All right. The other
Exactly.
thing where economics are concerned, the stock market is going up and up here in the United States.
Mhm.
And billionaires on the news today, they are making oodles of money right now
Mhm.
during this.
Mhm.
And that money should be kind of taxed to go out.
Yeah.
So on the bigger scale, when we look at funding the WHO, thank God we're starting to do that again. And we have to find out mechanisms, but there is not the morality. The morality is a question that we're going to have to deal with when we talk about medications for poorer countries. Here in the United States, again, our microcosm of the whole world, here in the United States, we have to make sure everybody gets the vaccine, because those that are workers in housekeeping or in nursing homes, people in a much more limited financial situation are needed to keep our economy going. Restaurants, workers in restaurants, all levels of people are needed to keep all economies going, even on the macro scale level. So I think when we look at the WHO and what went with China and the political and the scientific world, we have to begin to first look at our humanity, why we are not free enough to say we have a need and we need to work on it together and be honest about it And I can see where the man who ran the WHO organization, how he had to be careful with China, because we all have to be careful with each other, period. But when you're accusing somebody, as we saw happening, we just put up a barrier, we put up walls. I don't know how we can work together as humanity, but what we have experienced, that is what the bigger organization on a national level. And I don't know how well we are handling it here, because we have seen how difficult individual states, when Trump said, all right, each state has to get their own PPE stuff, equipment, their ventilators. They had to go ahead and do it on their own. All right. And we need coordination on some of those bigger manufactured items. All right. And that's where right now we're making that up. But there has to be a WHO organization that gets everything going equally across the world and make us all know how to do that. Help us to know how to do that. That's where I am.
Well, I think that's the question which we're kind of wrestling with right now, that when it was initiated in 1947, I think that was the true focus and the intent of setting up a global organization. When you're dealing with a worldwide pandemic, it's not something which only 4, 5, or 6 countries have to address. How can that be done in a collective manner with 194 participating member entities coming up with meaningful direction, which is embraced by at least 65, 70%. I mean, and the issue has well, in the article, in the comments, there is this very difficult bridge between generating and recognizing and addressing the scientific issues, which are very real, and combining that with a resolution which addresses the economics and politics in a worldwide global setting. Tough call. Anne.
I just want to make one comment, and that is that I believe that it was the World Health Organization which is responsible for eradicating smallpox. I may be wrong about that.
No, I think you're right.
But I think it was, and I think it's that kind of political will that the whole world, not just this country, but the whole world needs. But I also think that Jane has a comment.
Oh, how'd you know that, Anne? Are you?
You're not muted.
Oh, I am thinking about a lot of things here. One thing I'm very curious about, I was hoping someone might have some news on. They sent, WHO sent a team into Wuhan to investigate the origin. And from what I understand so far, they have not been able to be allowed into the Institute, but yet I don't know. I'm trying to find that out. Anyone have any clues as to if they're getting far? Because I know what happened. We were talking earlier about not with SARS. I know that Guinea did not allow them in initially. So it's the countries that are controlling WHO and not allowing them in to investigate the origin of these. They finally let them in. Well, I know now this is the WHO team has tried numerous times to go into Wuhan to investigate the origin, and they haven't allowed. And recently, I don't know if they've been allowed. I know they went over again.
Jane, this is Fred Hurt. This is about a week old, but they landed and 2 of the people had COVID, so they then had to quarantine for 14 days. That's what I had heard.
That's correct.
Was it a false positive?
I don't think so.
That is correct, because that's just happened within the past week.
Yeah.
I believe that the team which is being referred to just went to China within the past week, and if it was not one or two individuals had been, had tested positively. And I think the quarantine situation is applicable.
Interesting. Okay. So I'm very curious if they will be allowed into the Institute. And I heard something recently about Fauci having to do with the Institute years and years ago. He was one of the initial person that, the US has given the Wuhan Institute lots of money for this research. And I guess that's a very controversial situation right now too. And that Fauci was involved with it way back, which I didn't know until recently. But I still didn't look into it any further than that.
Well, I think Dr. Fauci was involved a number of years ago through the work that he did with SARS and also, HIV. Because he was instrumental in working in both of those areas, and that may have been his relationship with the World Health Organization. I guess the question that I pose, and what we're wrestling with here, is how much control should international organizations have over member countries?
Well, I do just, if I could interject, do you mind?
No.
Okay, it's Brittany again. Just today, there was a statement made by Deborah Birx, who
Yes.
was, head of the, coronavirus task force under the Trump administration. And she just pointed out today that there were reports going out under her name that differed from anything that she has ever given, and that there were a lot of misinformation, presented and sent off without her authorization. So I guess for me, obviously, I think we can all kind of agree that this really does involve voting at the front end of things, if that makes sense. So how much power should we give, member states? Well, it depends on what we're giving power to, like who are we voting in to these agencies?
It's a good question.
Again, let me respond based on, and this obviously is maybe at the within the foundation of the organization itself. It was set up as a global health organization, strong scientific base. What it appears to have evolved into is an organization that still has that mission as a primary focus of its existence, but the decision-making capacity has fallen to member states that individually have much to gain from a political and an economic standpoint, as opposed to from a scientific standpoint. And as Chris mentioned before, and I really agree with this comment, it has seemed to have lost a moral focus. Globally, because of the input which we're looking at as being of a political nature has overcome the true purpose of the scientific resolution of significant global health issues. How is that resolved?
Jane, did you want to say something?
No, I would agree with that assessment. It seems as though, too, most of these organizations, these countries are not putting their money into it either. They're not paying their dues. So, they have a lot to say, but they're not paying their dues. And that is, I don't understand that part either.
Yeah, going off of what Jane said, like how we put more accountability on those that actually stand up and say, hey, I'm going to contribute X amount, but then actually back off from doing that? Like, how can we stabilize WHO's funds? I mean, without going public. I mean, they did such a good job going public, but really?
It isn't an issue, and I don't, Chris, you may have touched upon this in your comments. They have a very, very important worldwide responsibility, but they don't have the teeth to enforce that responsibility. And unless the organizing or the member states that represent the governing body of the World Health Organization, unless they can move away from their own political interests, can we truly have an organization like the World Health Organization that functions in a non-political or mostly non-political manner?
I agree. It should be that way, but I don't think there's any possibility anymore of anything not being political in this world. I mean, even when the Gates Foundation gets involved, they decide what they're going to support. They support malaria. That's mainly what their monies go toward, is malaria in Africa. So basically, with their money, they decide where it's going with WHO.
But Jimmy Carter, after he left the presidency, he got involved in guinea worm eradication,
He did.
and he was able to get rid of it.
Mhm.
You know, so I guess I don't understand, and I shouldn't be talking, but I don't understand why he can get rid of guinea worm. Bill Gates cannot get rid of malaria. We can get rid of smallpox, and the world is still going to hell. You know, like, what role does the Secretary General have any say over the direction of who?
Well, he makes $240,000 a year.
Oh, that's nice. But does he have any say over where the World Health Organization?
And I don't know that. I'm
I
not.
think they have committees. They have committees galore
Uh,
there that make decisions on things. I don't think he's totally the decisive factor.
Okay.
It seems to me that there's this carrot stick idea, or one nation showing its sovereignty, or it's wanting to get ahead or be on top or keep its secrets, whatever it is that on the human level is going on. There was a suggestion in the readings that we can't have a black or white situation. Even going to the declaring of a pandemic, you know, either we don't have a pandemic or we do have a pandemic. And at what point do we declare that? And that was another problem that the World Health Organization had when it came to China. At what point do they declare a pandemic globally? And the problem was, it's either black or white. It's either yes or no. They were kind of looking at maybe a gradation, you know, and maybe that would be a gentler way of entering into a country that's could say on a global scale, we think we have a problem here. And then maybe it could come out into a softer tone. Maybe they're at stage 1. We're going, the world could be invited in to look. WHO could be invited in, instead of right away, them as a single nation, China, getting into a panic about being declared the site of a pandemic, you know, and its esteem in the world population going down the tubes. I don't know. It seems it's either black or white, carrot or stick. But where do we find maybe a softer way of grading what a nation is going through? And we all will be graded that way with a little bit more understanding that we don't understand everything right now. That was a suggestion that was in the papers, and I think it's a good one.
Well, they say that actually the China virus really started in the fall and not in December.
Yes.
And it spread in Wuhan, but it never went to Shanghai. They allowed international flights out. And I think that's what exposed Italy so terribly, because they have a lot of Italians in that Bergamo region,
Mhm.
in the textile industry and everything. But nobody hardly in Shanghai got it because they didn't allow any flights during that time into that area. So I think they were very well aware of what was going on. And they just did not want to, if you will, panic people or get it out. They didn't want the world to know.
I think too, you know, the impact of culture has to be considered. As Jane was saying, that
Mhm.
the Chinese are very proud people, and
Yes.
they may have tried to downplay this, figuring they could keep it themselves. And for instance, you know, they were able, as it said in the book, cordon off 60 million people. And I can remember seeing on one of the news channels, a lady was in her apartment for 50 days and was elderly, was running out of food. And you looked at the shots on the street, there was nobody on the streets. And Fauci even said himself that that culture, the things that they did in China would not work in our culture. And we look at the number of cases that we have in this country, 25 million, as a percentage of the total. It's way oversized, you know, in terms of the percentage. We have many more cases in this country than, you know, relative to our population than other countries do. Take India, for example, you know, poor country. So, you know, I think, you know, it's compliance, and it's compliance has to do with the culture. And the other thing that WHO has to deal with, besides the culture that they're dealing with in each of these countries, is the very problem of leadership. You know, Tedros made a mistake. He made a mistake, and he downplayed this, and that was the wrong approach with Ping, because Xi Jinping, because he is a strong man, and he took advantage of him, and they just kept their cards close to the vest for several more weeks. And you know, if you know, win a game like Kansas City did, or Tampa Bay, you know, you can get more funding, I think, if WHO would win some of these. When they lose, it's gonna get tough to get funding, and people are gonna say, "Where is my money going to?" I have a nephew who was an infectious disease doctor in the Navy. He got his master's in infectious disease from Johns Hopkins, where a lot of them go, and now he's in private practice in Central Washington State. And he said, you know, you have to listen to the clinicians. He told my sister, you know, you take a guy like Ben Gupta, who you see from time to time on the news channels. He's in the emergency room every day. He is a clinician. He knows what's going on. You know, some of these other guys, you know, they're academics, and, you know, I would submit that all scientists aren't the same. You know, you can have, and I worked, you know, in the pharmaceutical and medical device industry, and worked with a lot of scientists, and they're very strong on their own opinions, and they don't budge, and they to try to get them to come up with a consensus is very difficult. So if it's not to say, you know, that everybody agrees with all the science all the time, because there's going to be differences of opinion. So it's a very tough thing. But I think in this case, unfortunately, it was a failure of leadership there. And then, you know, I won't go into this country because that could take hours. But I'll submit back my time, remaining time.
Well, Fred, I think you're making a very, very good point, and this is the issue which we're really discussing here. It is there is a very challenging, if not almost impossible, organizational conflict within the WHO organization, being controlled, as I'm interpreting in the readings, by larger countries that are very much concerned about COVID-19 and the health implications it has. But you weigh that against the politics of taking positions in dealing with it, specifically in the setting of a communist country like China versus a country like the United States or Canada or the United Kingdom. And in that decision-making process, how do you bring the two together to say, this is our position and this is what we're going to do in this kind of a setting, in this global setting? I don't know.
Well, I would submit that, you know, the leader, the Secretary General, Director General has to know the majority of those 194 countries pretty well. And he has to have differing approaches to different countries. And you know, I was in Hong Kong 12 years ago and then took the train across, went through customs, took the train into communist China, into Shenzhen. And you know, Shenzhen is a beautiful place. It's built brand new from the ground up since 1980. It was a fishing village in 1980, and Mao Zedong wanted to have a modern city. But you get there, and it's like buildings without faces, without people. You know, you can contrast the vitality and the vibrance of Hong Kong to the somberness of Shenzhen, and you know, Shenzhen's 14 million people. You know, it's not a small place. So, you know, that difference in culture, just, you know, that close together is a stark contrast. So he, you know, he has to know who he's dealing with, and he's got to, he or she, whoever, you know, is the general director, has to know how to respond quickly. And they did find this, you know, in the wet markets, and this has happened. That's where their other viruses all come from, is from these wet markets in Wuhan, and they tried to get those outlawed, you know, 5 or 10 years ago, and China refused. And you know, they're bringing in wild animals, and they showed them, you know, on tarps on the floor, and you can't do that. You know, you just can't run that way. And I think that we need to shut those down. And if it's not the WHO, it's got to be the other countries have to come forward and say, now's the time. You know, this is where, you know, the fact they have the ducks running through the peasants' huts, you know, and they're very elementary, if no sanitation, and you know, the babies don't have diapers. You can imagine what happens there if you've had a 2-year-old, and so you know, the sanitation is poor, and stuff starts, and that's not what they want to portray. They want to portray Shanghai, and they want to portray Beijing, and they want to portray Shenzhen, which are gleaming cities with new cars and, you know, middle class of 300 million people. So you know, it's something's got to be done.
Can I interject?
Yeah, go ahead. Sure.
I'm sorry.
No, that's
But
right.
that brings me back to the, you know, my original thought. We need to give greater power to who. I still like saying WHO. We need to give power back to them. So how do we do that successfully? You know, to put pressure on other countries so that, you know, our worldwide, you know, prerogative becomes one in which it involves I'm sorry, everybody on the planet. I mean, how do we do that successfully? I mean, we can only do that if we put pressure on other countries' bottom lines. And I've said this before. I mean, we backed out of the WHO earlier last year. We're coming back into it now. But how do we give WHO more power to say,
You can watch this.
You want to say something, Robin?
No.
I thought I heard somebody else speak. Go ahead.
so, and I'm going to give the group a little background. This is why I'm thinking enforcement only. I work for enforcement, compliance. That's what I do for a living. Okay. So what I'm saying is the only way to give this organization power, now that we're back on board, is to provide them with enough resources, funding, obviously different venues of enforcing, right?
I don't think there's disagreement there, Britt. I think the issue is the countries that we're talking about and that you're referencing, I think we're all referencing, are all members of the World Health Organization.
Right.
And if they aren't going to make the enforcement decisions, and B, provide the dollar support to actually do the enforcement, how is there going to be a resolution? How are we going to be able to say, or how is the World Health Organization going to say, China, it began with you and it has to be resolved this way? Going against China itself, who is one of the major member entities
Mm-hmm.
in the World Health Organization itself.
Honestly, privately, that's where I'm pointing to everything in this article, privately. First of all, we depend heavily on China. China depends heavily on us.
Sure.
It should have been that simple. Just breaking it down, you know, hey, listen, they didn't do what we wanted. Well then, and I understand, okay, let me back up. I understand that, you know, politics have changed. So I'm going to back up and say that things will be, I'm sure, different going forward. But there has to be a bite that WHO has internationally so that the next pandemic that comes along, because this won't be the last, the next pandemic that comes along, they have to have greater power, obviously, you know, than throwing, they throw globs of honey at China. I mean, come on. I mean, that's what they did. And China, you know what they were doing? Making fools of WHO this whole time. They were like, oh, yeah, no, we found this out. But then minutes later, or that day, released it to the press within their own country. I mean, that's ridiculous. We have to give WHO bite. And that is my stance because of my profession. We need to give them bite, because without bite, you're never going to have compliance. And from, you know, and I'm just going to finish this with saying, from an international global perspective, here, I'm going to finish this. I'm going to say that, and you guys are going to think me crazy, but I think that every politician, especially just, you know, within our country, should have to undergo a personality trait system, and that can vary depending on, I think it should be multiple. I think they should pass the top 4. Anyway, I think that every politician running for office should be able to pass that in order to run for office. bottom line, this is what I've learned through the pandemic. Everyone should be able to at least pass a personality test. That's all I'm saying. And it could go well for other countries to adopt the same policy. You know, just pass the bottom line. You know, can you think without yourself as the object? I'm sorry, that got too political. I'm sorry, everyone. I'm sorry.
Well, let me interject something since you've gone off a little bit. I'll go off a little bit
I
here
did. I'm
too.
sorry.
There were, you know, we don't follow the rules in this country either. When you think of 100 dogs were just imported from China, from the meat markets. I don't know if anybody's aware of that.
No.
What do you
No.
mean by this?
They were supposedly what you call rescue dogs. They were in the meat markets in China, like Chris was talking about earlier. This made me think of it when he was talking about it. And they are being allowed in our country, these 100 dogs, they're puppies. If you import a dog, I'm in this, when you import a dog into this country, if you don't bring every kind of vaccination and rabies shot and everything, you can't bring it in. And I'm talking about a legitimate pedigree puppy. You can't bring it in. But they're allowing China to send in 100 puppies that have obviously no vaccination, because you can't vaccinate them at that young age. Yet we're allowing them in. So
He's allowing them in.
we're in this country. It's insane. Our country started rabies years ago again, because people wanted puppies in Southern California. So they were bringing in puppies from Mexico. And that's how rabies started again in this country. But anyway, that's a little off the subject.
But still relevant.
Well, it's just, we don't follow our own rules sometimes. And, you know, so.
Right, which is why I am a proponent of everyone having to pass a very basic personality test before being able to run for government. I'm sorry. I know, I'm sorry. I digress. I'm sorry. Everyone, I'm sorry.
You know,
I
look,
would say to Fred, I appreciate you bringing in culture of a country. I think that's really important for all countries to know that we don't understand the culture of everyone we deal with, and we need to do that. And I think, Britt, that's power too, to understand the culture. That gives us power in our understanding of who we are talking to, of who we're trying to find a way of communicating what is the basic human needs that we all are globally experiencing. And I also think WHO needs to look at its structure. The article implied that it has taken on too much. It has really diversified what it does. And there are, like, all these countries have their small functioning little piece that is like the tool for the bigger picture of WHO, that they feed into. Every country has they're established on their own right to feed into WHO. So there has to be some kind of better communication between the bigger structure and the smaller country structures of WHO. And if they are working to help those smaller structures understand the cultures of all of the countries involved in the communication, then there could be some power coming out of WHO, which is looking more at the human needs that we have. So the structurally and culturally, I think we need a lot
Yeah,
more.
but we need to put more pressure on China. Did you see what they contributed? And after SARS and H1N1, like, did you see what they contributed? That's what I'm saying about enforcement. That's
Well,
all I'm
we
saying.
question that, yeah, question what's going on there and why the value isn't there. Why we need to question why there isn't a value to contribute
Yeah,
from the nations. And I'd like to know why they are not valuing it. And then we need to talk about it.
exactly. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
think that enforcement is an impossibility because countries want to maintain their autonomy. You have countries that are pulling out of the European Union because they object to subjecting their own autonomy to Brussels. We have a former president who did quite well in this country politically by having a position of America first. All of our countries have their own interests, and it will be anathema to say we will subject our self-interest, or we will subject our ability to determine our self-interest to an international organization that we have not granted any authority to. I don't think that enforcement is going to go anywhere. I think that the WHO has been and will continue to be a consultancy organization. You have a problem and you ask the WHO to help. They have expertise. They provide their experts, they provide their investigations, they suggest solutions, they request permission to try to create those solutions and work with the host country to have those solutions work. I don't think countries will say, let alone the United States say, we have a problem and we are going to let the WHO tell the FDA, tell Medicare, tell our pharmaceutical companies, tell our Senate and our House what we have to do. Not going to happen.
No, I agree. Their biggest problem is they didn't warn us early enough when they knew. Before December, they knew, and they didn't warn our country.
Well, our country.
That's their biggest
Yeah, an enforcement
responsibility.
issue.
Their biggest responsibility is advising and warning, and they didn't even do that because of fear of China.
I want to mention something that Chris talked about earlier, and that's getting the vaccines into the less developed countries. I worked for Big Pharma for a number of years and was associated with them in other ways for a number of years. And I think that'll happen. They're global countries. They sell companies. They sell into most every country in the world. They have subsidiaries there. They have sales organizations. The way it works, though, is kind of maybe what Britt was saying a little bit about the economics. They get their costs covered by selling it to us for $20 a vial and to other countries that can afford it. And then as time goes on, they provide it at, very, very large discounts to places in Africa and South America and places that can't afford it. So I think that'll happen. It's just going to take time.
I think it's kind of disgusting that Africa is not going to get any of the vaccine until for another 2 or 3 years. I think that's
I don't know.
almost criminal.
That's what I would think would happen.
Yeah, but I think it's criminal. I do. Anyway, so we have 5 minutes.
I hope it doesn't happen that way. Let me put it there.
We have 5 minutes. We've had an excellent discussion. I think there's some indicators that what the resolution should be. The reality is, and I guess I also keep on coming back to this point myself. Given the state of our affairs worldwide, not only within this country, but globally, what is the role of the World Health Organization, realistically? Can it do what it was initially intended to do?
Anybody?
By virtue of this
I
go ahead.
worry about our country. I was in Asia. I was in the Philippines, Japan, Taiwan, and came back to the United States on March 18th on the last flight. I couldn't get into Philadelphia initially. I took a flight out of Taipei on March 18th, the last flight before they closed the airport, and it was the last flight out on United. And I come into the United States to San Francisco. They didn't even ask what country. I was dying to tell them what country. I wanted to know if they thought I had COVID or something. They didn't even ask me. in San Francisco, what countries I'd been in. Now I do have global entry, but I was shocked. I kept saying, do you want me to, I have this form, do you want to look at it? And they go, no, we don't care. That's, but none of my friends wanted to be near me for at least a month.
Yeah.
And I mean, so we're not following our own rules. It's frustrating. So we can't worry about the World Organization a whole lot. We need to worry about here.
Yeah.
Any other concluding thoughts?
Jack,
Yeah, I just want to mention all the politics or economics, things that are involved or related to, unfortunately, to WHO. Once the COVID-19 problem came, realized in the United States, I noticed what was lacking here in this country was tracking. I'm from Japan. In Japan, once they find somebody is contracted with COVID, they do thorough tracking, where it came from, where it's going, how it's spreading. And then I thought that was very lacking in this country. And that was one of the very reasons that spread so widely. And then, of course, there are, cultural differences. We wear masks without any hesitations, not because, it goes both ways. I don't want to give anything to you, and I don't want to get anything from you. There's a certain courtesy, politeness in there, but American culture, more individualistic culture, and people do what each person wants to do. And then, of course, Japan is much, much smaller country. So its government is easier to control people there. But even China or Korea, big countries with many population, Korea has the lowest COVID-19 contract or contract with people.
North
Yes.
Korea or South Korea?
South Korea, I meant. So, well, that's probably culture, and then also something to do with maybe virus. Virus affects to white people more than Asian people. And then even Asian countries, some of the third countries that are very poor, still COVID-19, number of COVID-19 patients are much smaller than United States in ratio of population.
Mm-hmm.
So I think a lot to do with culture difference. And then also United States, United States blame China, and then I do too, because they were hiding, not open, and then WHO was involved in that scheme. But once it got here, I think United States was not acting immediately. And then that was one of the reasons that spread so badly here. That's all.
What did our former president say? Oh, we only have 5 cases and they'll be gone in the next couple of weeks.
all right.
Oh, no, it was Fauci that
That
said
wasn't
not to
a
wear
political
masks.
statement.
That's right.
Fauci originally said not to wear masks.
Yeah,
That's right.
it'll be gone by the 4th of July.
Yeah.
So we
And
moved,
then they did not do the tracking.
right,
The
You're right.
tracking, that
Still
was
not.
very, very important thing in contagious, disease.
and we're still not doing a good job of tracking. I hate to end this discussion. It's fascinating, and I really appreciate everybody taking part in it. Next week, oh, I want to say, when we get the video, I'll send you the link for it. It'll probably be on YouTube. Next week, there is a video on YouTube produced by Great Decisions about global supply chains, and that's the topic for next week.
Do we watch the video before we
Before
come
you
to?
watch the video,
Okay.
I will send you the link. I will send
Okay.
you the link for this once it's up, and I'll send you the link for WHO videos that you're going to send me, right, Nevin?
That's correct. I will get that to tomorrow.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you,
you so
everybody.
much.
Good
For
Thank
sending
you.
it.
night.
Nevin.
Great job. Thanks, Nevin.
Thank you very much.
Good job.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye, thank you.
Bye. Have a good night and stay safe. Wear your masks and wash your hands.
Wash your hands.
Jackie's iPhone. Leave.